All right, so we're down to the last presentation of the session. So the last presenter is I think it's Dr. Eldat Avital. Eldat, are you there?
Actually, it's Rabia.
Is it Rabia? Oh, sorry,
Yes,
Rabia.
Rabia. Yeah, I'm Elda students. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
A star next to the wrong name. I assume, Rabia, that you're also at the School of Engineering and Material Science at Queen Mary?
Yes, absolutely. I'm a PhD student. Yes.
Okay, so Rabia will be presenting the studies of ventilation effects in mitigating airborne disease transmission in classrooms using OpenFOAM. Please go ahead, Rabia.
Thank you. So can everyone see my screen?
Yes,
Yes.
you can go ahead.
Okay,
Please
thank
press
you.
play.
Okay, thank you. The title of hello everyone. My name is Rabia Abid. I'm a PhD student under Dr. Eldat Avital, and the title of my presentation is studying the ventilation effects in mitigating airborne disease transmission in classrooms using OpenFOAM. So in a brief outline to my presentation, I will be talking about the introduction and background, aims and objectives, reduced order modeling, methodology and numerical setup, then the 3D patterns of particles that I've modeled in a full classroom, and then 2D patterns, and then conclusion and future work and references. So to start off with, obviously the COVID pandemic, it highlighted the understanding of how the virus, it actually is spreading and how important it is for us to control the airflow indoors and have some settings in place at public places for control measures. However, the important sector that was drastically affected was the educational sector. And in the words of the CEO at Education Support, the pandemic has had a huge effect on the provision of education. We need to learn from what has happened, plan for the future, and grasp how the crisis has affected the mental health and well-being of education staff working across the sector. So primarily, it is very important for us to understand that the educational sector was, drastically affected by the COVID pandemic, and therefore also to understand that the vaccine is not the only solution. Obviously, the understanding of how the virus spreads is actually more important. And as far as the airborne transmission is concerned, it is not just restricted to COVID, but other diseases like TB as well. And therefore, on the screen, you can see a map of the estimated TB incidence in 2021. And according to the world, these all statistics, they are according to the World Health Organization. And therefore, we believe, as researchers, we believe that it is very important for us to investigate the mechanisms of the spread of the airborne diseases, rather than just focusing on, a solution being already there, which are vaccines and pharmaceutical solutions. But what about how the virus, how the airborne diseases, they spread, and what actually we can do to minimize when it comes to window sizing of rooms and the ventilation, especially in classrooms. So the research that I'm doing in my PhD is mainly focused on the classrooms. So mainly the focus of my work has been, the aim has been to study computationally the spread of airborne infection in educational settings, and then obviously trying to understand the role of people's thermal plumes, sitting layout, ventilation, and air purification. Although today I'm not presenting for the air purification, that's an ongoing work in my PhD. So the main objective was to model a large classroom, and there are two standing instructors in front of the classroom, and there are 30 pupils. And this is a classroom of primary school students. And then you have the URAN simulations, which are for the airborne infection due to a speech event, and that speech event is 5 seconds, 5 minutes. Now, in my simulation, the infector can be an instructor or a pupil, but in one case, only one person will be infected, either an instructor or a pupil. And then in my study, what I've done is that I've analyzed the spread of infectious particles through particle dynamic simulations, and did a bit of post-processing using Wells-Riley risk analysis. So in other words, it's important to understand the approach that I've used, which is called the reduced order modeling. And mainly it is based on the fully mixed air assumption. It can actually lead to useful guidance, such as the required level of air changes per hour. And it can explain why, there are places in the room that seem to be more vulnerable for infection, and they cannot provide guidance where best to place the ventilation. And therefore, we capture the effects using the CFD that includes the particle dynamics. So as said earlier in my study, I've used a generic medium-sized class of classroom of 2 standing instructors, a short speech event of 5 seconds. Around the number of particles or droplets is about 10,000. And there are 2 scenarios which have been modeled. One is a poorly ventilated classroom, and then a well-ventilated classroom to see the difference. And what I observed was that poorly ventilated classrooms, they show dominance of the people's thermal plumes over the airflow. And this leaves places in the classroom which are more prone to accumulation of the droplets. And on the other hand, the ventilation, it causes more uniform spreading of the droplets in early times. So this I will show at the end of my presentation, the results I've got. And the effects of the infector's position and the level of occupation in the classroom also is a very important factor when it comes to the CFD approach that I've taken. So there were 4 cases that I studied per infector, and they were studied using URANS, which is the unsteady Reynolds average Navier-Stokes, and OpenFOAM is used for all simulations. So the results that I'm getting from my study, they enable us to understand where to place the HEPA filters and air disinfection devices, including fans. So in my work, the head of the tutors, as you can see in the figure, it is exposed to varying temperature than the body. So the body, it is covered with a cloth. So that is around 26.6 degree, and the head, it is 31.8. All of this is taken from published literature, and the internal air temperature is 24 degree. In this presentation, I will only present the results of one of the cases that I've got, not all of the cases that I've run using OpenFOAM. So you can see the classroom on the screen. Figure 4, it represents a classroom which is not ventilated. And you can see that I've highlighted, the infectors. So only one of these people will be infected. So I've highlighted the infectors using a circle. And in the figure 5, you can see that that is a ventilated classroom. So these are the 2 numerical models I've developed using OpenFOAM. And the particles, they're assumed to be spherical, and the effect from particles to air will be negligible. There's a Lagrangian method that I've used in OpenFOAM that calculates the trajectory of each particle by solving the momentum equation. And the window sizing that I've used for my ventilated classroom is around 3.8 times 0.375. And why I've chosen this, sizing, it is to keep in mind the ACH of 6 air exchange per hour. And keeping that in mind, the velocity that I've used at the 2, inlets and outlet windows, it is 10 centimeter per second. So this number obviously is what WHO, the World Health Organization, has said would be a good number, which is 6 ACH. So in the flow chart, you can see the total number of cases I investigated. So there are 4 cases. 2 they are based on ventilation, and the other 2 they are based on no ventilation. And in those categories, I also modeled a full classroom of 32 students, 2 tutors, and then a half classroom where the number of students has been reduced and the number of tutors has also been reduced. So in total, we are studying 4 cases and varying the number of students and the tutors, and also studying for both ventilation and non-ventilation. Now, it is important to understand how what the simulation in my work is actually doing. So for the infector tutor, for example, the simulation of 1,000 seconds is to first achieve a typical flow pattern in the room, and then there is a 5 seconds speech event that takes place, and then the simulation, it is run again for another 1,000 seconds. So these are the results that I've got for the thermal plumes. So we can see that in this case, you can see that the tutor was infected, and you can see the time variation and the particle trajectory. It is captured for particle diameters of 5 microns. This is done for all of the simulations, and we can see that the particles, they are caught and then they rise with the infected tutor's thermal plume. And this is in line to, again, published work by Stettler et al. So we compared the results we've got by published literature, and we believe that it is in line to what has already been published by other researchers. Now, in the no ventilation cases, you can see on the screen, we obviously have, you can see that what is happening in the top row, you can see the velocity contour slices just at the speech event, then 500 seconds after the speech event, then 800 seconds, and then it is followed by the second row, which is a Q criterion of the flow structures. So here we can see that in the middle of the room, the results, they show the thermal plumes, they spread non-uniformly after 800 seconds from the speech event, and there are large flow structures following that you can see in the second row. And then we compared this with the case where we had the ventilation, as you can see. And the results for the tutor, so this case was particularly for the tutor infector, and in this case you can see in the tutor who is infected in the middle of the room. The results, they show that thermal plumes, they spread uniformly after 800 seconds from speech event, and large flow structures following thermal plumes. However, they are more uniform compared to the no ventilation case. And in this, furthermore, you can see the 3D patterns of the particles in a full classroom. So the top row is for the no ventilation case, and the second row you can see is for the ventilation case. So we can see that the concentrations of particles in front corner of the room is visible, and what happens is that they spread to the back of the room by 800 seconds after the speech event, and the ventilation concentration of particles is in the front of the room, but is not greatly spread at the end of the room by 800 seconds. So you can see varying patterns of particles. Then the 2D patterns, they allow us to understand more about how the particles, they are spreading and what, corners they are dominating in the room. So in the no ventilation case, which is the top row, we can see that particles, they're concentrated mainly at the corner of the room and then spread evenly 500 seconds and 800 seconds after the speech event. But for the ventilation case, we noted that the concentration of the particles is in the half of the room at the front instead of the corner. So this was the massive observation that we got from our study. Again, following up from that, you can see the top view as well for the 2D patterns of the particles in a full classroom. So again, the particles for the no ventilation case, they are concentrated mainly at the corner of the room. And for the ventilation case, you can see that it is again in the half of the room at the front instead of the corner. We did some post-processing as well using the Wells-Riley equation, and we noted here that a speech, so what this slide it is actually showing is a speech of 5 seconds that was created by accumulating 60 times in different phases from simulations of the 5-second speech interval. This is the post-processing, that we have done using a post-processing code. And in this, you can see that for the non-ventilated case, the infection risk contour, it shows a risk of 6% with more concentration on the corner of the room, as you can see in the contour. And if you see the ventilated case, here the result after 500 seconds of speech event, the infection risk contour shows a risk of 2.5%. So we can see that there was a considerable difference in the percentages, and there is a reduction of 58%, we believe, from the non-ventilation scenario when you introduce the windows into the room. And the concentration of particles is also more in the front of the room instead of the corner. So this was actually an important observation in my study. To conclude, what I've done so far in my study for the PhD, We have been able to see the ventilation through windows, considerably reducing infection risk. As I've shown you in the last slide, effect on number of people we believe in the room did not have impact on results as such, but ventilation did. And ventilation considerably reduced the spread of the particles as well, limiting the particles mainly to the front of the classroom. And ventilation also allowed for the evenly spread of the thermal plumes instead of the non-uniformity in the no ventilation case. We also believe that moving forward from this study, we will be able to introduce HEPA filters and ceiling fans to see the effect of the devices on the infection spread. And this study also enabled us to understand mainly the spread of the infectious particles in classrooms and flow patterns, which we don't believe are commonly researched on. And that's the list of references I used. And I think that's all from me. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Rabia.
Thank you.
Any questions for Rabia?
Yeah.
Just one sec.
Yeah. Good morning,
Good morning.
Rabia. Yeah, I have a small question. You mentioned that for the tutor, there is a thermal plume, but I'm wondering whether for the pupils, there is also that thermal plume during the simulation.
Yes, there is, but I think in my slides I've actually not shown that. Yeah, but we observed, yes, there will be for the student as well. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Any further questions? I've got one question. Rabia, did you consider using, since these particles, they're neutrally buoyant, they're not sinking down or anything, did you consider using a Eulerian field to represent the infection concentration rather than Lagrangian particles?
Yes, actually, that's something which we are doing on the side as well. Instead of using the Lagrangian approach, using Eulerian approach. So that also is something which we are looking into. Yes, we've considered that to further try to research on this. Yes, we've considered that as well.
It'd be very interesting to compare.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to compare. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, thank you again, Rabia. If there's no further questions, thank you, and I hope you can get back to bed and back to sleep. And thank you for getting up so early. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you.